Hello, everybody. Here we are, another wonderful show. And I have a wonderful guest, Karl. How are you?
I am fine.
I'm so happy that you could come. I was after you for a while, and finally you succumbed. You couldn't resist.
No way.
No way. So you are a native. It's very rare when I say native, I don't mean an Indian, but you are from Long Island, from the Hamptons.
Well, actually, I'm originally, in terms of my family, they were from Sag Harbor on my father's side. My grandfather settled in Sag Harbor about 1905. He was an engraver. And Joseph Fahey, who owned the watch case factory, which has been turned into a very high-end apartment complex, he knew that engraving, well, you as a Hungarian would know, engraving was a very big thing among Hungarian Jews. It was an art. So what he would do, Joseph Fahey, is he would meet these Hungarian Jewish engravers coming into this country at Ellis Island or Castle Clinton before Ellis Island was open in 1892. Either he or his representatives would bring them right out to Sag Harbor, and they'd work in Fahey's watch case factory, big brick building in the middle of Sag Harbor. And my grandmother, Stephanie was her name, was also from Hungary, and she came out here because her sister Ernestine had married into the Spitz family, and that's it was a family in Sag Harbor, Hungarian, and they owned an appliance store on Main Street where Fish's Furniture is now, and also some of them worked at the watch case factory. So she was out here with her sister Ernestine, and she met Herman, my grandfather. They fell in love and settled in Sag Harbor. However, then Herman decided, years later, to move into New York City. In fact, Arthur Spitz, who was a trustee in the village of Sag Harbor, when we first moved, my wife and I, to Sag Harbor in 1974, I remember standing on Main Street in front of the American Hotel with Arthur Spitz, and he said my grandfather had made a big mistake because during the Depression, said Arthur, we could glean potatoes in Bridgehampton, and we could eat. And meanwhile, my grandfather, Herman, had thought he could find better economic opportunity in New York. And the family settled in Brooklyn, and he got a job in Manhattan. But then the Depression came, and there was no work. In fact, my uncles and my father told me about how my grandfather would go into he had no work in the city. His job was over. But he would go to the city every morning, nevertheless, and drink coffee with some of the other men and so forth, just to do something during the day. And in the stress of the Depression in the 30s, my poor grandfather had a heart attack and died. And he probably, I mean, I think Arthur was right. If he would have stayed in lovely Sag Harbor, he could have gleaned potatoes like a lot of folks did, Jewish and Gentile. During the Depression, he could eat, he could make it, and fish. I mean, you could live off the land, and
right.
On the East End, you can't exactly live off the land in Brooklyn, and it would have been far better for him. So my father then was born in Brooklyn, and so was I, from Brooklyn.
Oh, you were born in Brooklyn.
And Brooklyn, New York,
Oh.
and then my folks moved to Queens, and then I went off to college.
In Queens.
At St. Albans in Queens, that's where they lived. And we lived. And then I went off to college, Antioch College in Ohio. And there I was inspired to be a journalist. I had what would be called an internship at a newspaper in Cleveland. And I was very excited because it really was committed. And this is a corny story, but above the entrance of the Cleveland Press was the motto of the paper, "Give light and the people will find their own way." And I was just a copy boy. And one of the duties that you had as a copy boy was to man the telephones at night when the city room was virtually empty. And people would call, and if there was a story about an event in Cleveland, you wrote a memo and you gave it to the city desk. And if something was happening in Shaker Heights, it's a suburb of Cleveland, you gave it to the suburban desk. But if it was a terrible horror story, if it was somebody calling about a corruption or danger or some kind of terrible thing happening, you wrote a memo and you gave it to it was about a dozen, we call them now investigative reporters. Years before they were called muckrakers, but same thing. They would investigate these tales of horror, and then they would write an expose. They would document the information that I would kind of draft for them in my little memo to them, sketch for them, and then there'd be a big story in the Cleveland Press. And what really impressed me as a kid, my folks had moved back to Brooklyn at that point, East Flatbush, was as a kid from Brooklyn, I was 18. Half the time, that expose was enough to solve the problem. And in terms of my ending up doing and teaching investigative reporting, it's been my experience doing this kind of work that half the time you can resolve a problem, even a huge problem, with giving the people the light and allowing them to find their own way. I mean, just as an example, my first big story was fighting, through journalism, a road that Robert Moses wanted to build on Fire Island, a 4-lane highway, which would have essentially wiped out these magical communities on Fire Island and the beautiful nature on Fire Island. There's a place called Sunken Forest. It's just sculpted by the ocean winds. Just the beautiful, the Shoreham nuclear plant and the other nuclear plants that the Long Island Lighting Company wanted to build. I did a lot of investigative reporting on that.
This is such a far cry from engraving. I thought you were going to start telling me that you started out as an engraver.
Well,
I mean, I know that you're a journalist and you had written many things and books also, but you said you're a Hungarian and from Sag Harbor, and your parents were engraving. So you never learned engraving?
Well, in fact, when I was a teenager in St. Albans, I'm pretty good with my hands.
Yeah.
And I got into wood sculpture, and I would take the bus and then the subway to the Educational Alliance in Manhattan to learn wood sculpture with Chaim Gross, a very famous wood sculptor. And I thought of that as being a sculptor, because I don't know if I can do the fine engraving my grandfather did, but I was good in clay and wood, and also good with music. In fact, my grandmother from Sag Harbor, I mentioned Stephanie, was her name. I have a cousin named Steve Grossman who played the saxophone with Miles Davis. He was that good. He went to Juilliard and then joined this famous jazz musician, Miles Davis. And my brother, Stephen Grossman, named after both of them, my grandmother, or their grandmother too. He's a very famous blues guitarist, travels all around the world playing black blues. He got involved with some of the famous black blues.
Don't tell me he's black.
No, my brother is a Jewish guy from Brooklyn and Queens, just like me. But he thinks black blues was, he thinks even above jazz, one of the greatest things about the United States. And he studied with the Reverend Gary Davis and Skip James and Mississippi John Hurt, and he learned this wonderful form of music. I, however, did this internship at the Cleveland Press through Antioch College, and even though I still have my saxophone at home, in fact, I still have my sculpting tools at home. Not only years, the decades have passed, but I got into journalism when I was at the Cleveland Press, and that's when I was 18.
You mentioned the Educational Alliance in Manhattan. Yeah. I remember going there in my youth for something or another. It's funny.
Chaim Gross, who didn't have to teach there, but he was tied to Educational Alliance through, I think. I don't know. He just thought it was an important place. It was a very important place for actually Jewish immigrants
Yes.
coming to America, and kind of a settlement house in a way. So no, and then finally we moved back to where my grandparents on my father's side were from, Sag Harbor, in 1974.
So how old were you when you came back to Sag Harbor?
Well, in 74, I'll do the arithmetic, 42 from 74 is 32. So I came back to Sag Harbor at 32. We had 2 little kids, my wife and I.
Oh, you skipped over that you got married.
Well, I got married very quick. I met this girl from Huntington. Again, I'm from the city. I'm not from the island. I'm from the city, but I've been here forever.
Yeah.
And I've been a journalist here forever. But at Antioch College, first week, I meet this girl, Janet Kopp. That was her maiden name, from Centerport, actually, in Huntington. Huntington Beach, actually, to be even more precise. And that was it. I was 17.
Wow.
17, and we've been together ever since. And for more arithmetic, we've been together now. Let's see, I met her at 17 for 58 years.
Wow, that's a record.
I don't know, it's very easy. If you're with a person who, in fact, my brother had a record company, and the motto was, it's easy, I hope I'm not paraphrasing, it's easy when you're easy. In other words, I also like to sail, and I love sailing out here. And for a sailboat, there's a word called forgiving. In other words, if there's a big wind and the sailboat begins to heel, and you're a little concerned about capsizing, if it's a well-made sailboat, it'll come back from a very big heel. And you're okay, you don't capsize. That's a sailboat which is forgiving. And I think when people are forgiving, people are forgiving and, not that tightly wound, a little easier than many other people, you can be married happily, very happily for 58 years. And I've been happily married.
Did you write a book about that?
I don't know if it's easier for me to write a book about nuclear power or about toxic chemicals. I've written, 6 books now. To write a book, I think, about a happy marriage,
yes.
I don't know, I think that you would take 30 books to figure out what makes a happy marriage. I mean, I'm telling you my recipe.
Yes.
That my wife is sweet and forgiving and easy to live with to the nth degree. I mean,
but it takes 2 to tango.
Well, in marriage, and again, I'm no expert on this whatsoever, I think people have to just let the other person do the other person's thing. Provide space and just to be flexible, to be forgiving. Yeah, I mean, I don't mean forgiving in a kind of negative way, but just to people I've known who have clashed in marriage and they've gone their separate ways. It just seems to me I don't want to make a general statement, but it seems to me that maybe if they were a little easier with each other, and let each other have their own lives.
Let them be.
Let them be, like the Beatles song goes, things would have been better. But in any case, I can only say that marriage for me, and marriage can be hellish, I've heard, but for me it's been heaven for 58 years. So we met each other at 17. We've been together since we've been 17. We got ourselves formally married when we were the ripe old age of 19. And we were back on Long Island then because I left Antioch after my experience in Cleveland because Ohio wasn't my territory and I really couldn't be a journalist there. I'd go back to where I'm from. Mm-hmm. And my aim was to be an investigative reporter at my favorite newspaper growing up in New York City, which was the New York Herald Tribune. It was like the New York Times. It came out in the morning. It was a broadsheet. And I just thought that's when new journalism developed in the 60s. And it was a much more, it's a much more human paper. It's a much warmer paper than than the Times was, and frankly is, the New York Herald Tribune. Great reporters. Jimmy Breslin wrote for it, but fine reporters. Tom Wolfe wrote for it, and that's where I wanted to go. But to get there,
Fred McMorrow, Fred McMorrow.
I of course know of Fred McMorrow, but I don't know him.
I knew him very well.
Yeah. Well, you have connections to the paper that I
yes.
finally got a job with as a daily reporter, the Long Island Press.
Yes, that's where my husband
and I knew your husband. I knew your husband. And talking about easy, what a nice place to work. In fact, I'd still be there today if the Long Island Press hadn't gone out in 1977. It was forgiving. Nobody ever got fired from the Long Island Press. It was owned by the Newhouses. It was a great place to work. Dave Starr, who's still around, was the editor. He's in his 90s now. He's retired. Lives up in Massachusetts. But it was the greatest place to work. I was so sad that it went out.
So you had a column there?
Well, in the beginning, they mostly liked Queens people. It was a Queens-based paper in Jamaica. And Queens is a little different than Brooklyn. It's different, certainly, from the Bronx. And different from Manhattan. And so what they liked to hire at the Long Island Press was people who knew St. Albans and Jamaica and Flushing and Bayside, kind of part of the culture of Queens. And so I was hired. I mean, not necessarily because I was from Queens, but that made them very comfortable, that I knew the territory. I mean, I didn't know Shaker Heights, and I didn't know Cleveland. I mean, Cleveland was a great city. It was like a little New York, very diverse, working class, cultured city. I mean, people think of Cleveland as, an industrial town, but it's more than that. It was, I remember going to the Caramoo Theater in the east side of Cleveland, an integrated theater, which was very unusual in those days. We're talking, I was a copy boy at the Cleveland Press. This is 1961. No, 1960, because I remember John Kennedy was running for election to president, and I didn't cover it, I was copy boy, but I went to see him. He looked like a movie actor, tan and so handsome, very vibrant. So I started there in 60, maybe in August, the summer of 60, and I stayed till 61, the winter. It was a 6-month internship. But in any case, the Long Island Press liked folks from Queens, and they sent me to Suffolk, though I had been here at a weekly newspaper. This is when I was fighting Robert Moses and the road on Fire Island successfully as a journalist. That was the Babylon Town Leader in Babylon. It was a little ad in the New York Times. And just meanwhile, parenthetically, after leaving Antioch, coming here, reuniting with Janet here in Suffolk County, where, again, she was from. Though originally she was from the Bronx, but at 8, they moved out to Huntington. I thought I maybe needed some more college. So I went to, at that time, there was a little college starting at Delphi Suffolk College. It became Dowling College in an elementary school in Sayville. And in fact, just this week.
Still Adelphi.
Well, Adelphi stands.
Because my son went there.
Well, Adelphi in Garden City,
Yeah.
is a solid institution. But Adelphi Suffolk is a branch in Suffolk County, which became Dowling because of a huge contribution a financier named Dowling gave to Adelphi Suffolk. But just last year, 2016, Dowling so sadly went out. But I went to Adelphi Suffolk for a year and a half. And just this week, in fact, I went to a celebration of the life of, he was my favorite professor of all times. In fact, and I'm an academic. I'm a professor of journalism at State University of New York, College at Old Westbury. And as an academic, I've seen many a professor. I've observed other professors, how they teach you. You got to write reports when they're up for reappointment or tenure. Charles Raybeck, who actually for years, he lived right here in the town of East Hampton, in Amagansett. And also then he and Audrey, his wife, who was an education professor at Dowling, moved to Northwest 3 Mile Harbor. But in any case, at 95, he passed away in May of this year, and there was a celebration, as Barry Raybeck, who lives in Wainscott, his son put it, a celebration for the life of Charlie Raybeck. Wonderful professor. In fact, it was a great, I started a newspaper at Adelphi, Suffolk called The New Voice. I was the editor of this, and that gave me kind of the background to get this job at the Babylon Leader, and then fight Robert Moses for 2 years over the highway that he wanted to build, along with, they didn't call them environmentalists then, they were conservationists, Murray Barbash, Irving Leip, Robert Cushman Murphy, the well-known ornithologist. And then I went to the Long Island Press, which you knew, thinking I'd get then to the Herald Tribune, but the Tribune went out in 67. The Long Island Press goes out in 77,
Yeah.
and then I in 68 then.
Yeah, but the New Jersey paper was still there.
Sure, the Newark StarLedger continued.
Because that's where my husband went.
Yeah, well, I could have gone to there too.
Yeah.
I could have gone
He wrote the travel column.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
But I knew, I didn't go much into the office in Jamaica.
Yeah.
But you knew the people from Jamaica. You talked to them on the phone, and now and then you go in. It was a wonderful place to work, but sadly it went out of business. And then I went into teaching, and then the column, you asked about the column,
Yeah.
Dave Starr, after a few years, let me just say, what they hired me for originally was to cover cops and courts in Suffolk County.
Oh.
A police reporter, which I tell my journalism students it's a great thing to do, because if you screw up as a police reporter, you can get sued you wouldn't believe. So, I mean, with the wrong name of somebody being arrested. So don't even double check, you triple check everything. You become a very careful reporter. And after a few years of doing that, I was shifted to investigative reporting, which was my goal. And then I won a bunch of awards, the Polk Award and others. And Dave Starr then offers me a column on the Sunday Long Island Press, which you're familiar with, big, wonderful Sunday paper. And I did the column. And then when the press went out, a lot of the weekly newspapers here, including the East Hampton Star, Southampton Press, and so forth, asked if I would do the column in their, on their pages, which I have for many years.
Oh, by the way, I interviewed Tom McMorrow, who works for the East Hampton Star.
Right.
Was it East Hampton Star? Yeah.
Yeah, he's the son of.
No, he's a nephew of Fred McMorrow. Yeah.
Well, the Star is a wonderful paper. I write now not for the Star, but my column is in the other newspaper in East Hampton, the East Hampton Press.
So we're getting close to the end.
Yes.
But I'd like you to tell me about important things like your children.
Well, I would love to brag about my son, Adam.
Yeah.
Adam Grossman, who went to Pearson High School, just a couple of blocks from the watch case factory my grandfather worked in. And he went on to law school, Pace Law School. And Adam then came back. He loves this area. He studied environmental law with Robert Kennedy Jr. at Pace Law School. Came back here. He became Riverhead Town Attorney, a Green Party. It was called the Riverhead Party. Won in Riverhead, and they also Adam was the chairman of the Southampton Party, which was a Green Party in Southampton, which Fred Thiel organized, and he ran for supervisor.
And you have 1 minute to talk about your daughter.
Oh, I don't have a daughter. I'll just end with my son. I don't have a daughter. I have 2 boys.
Oh, 2 boys. I'm
and
sorry.
Adam, let me just note, he ran for judge in Southampton town last year. He lost, but he got a very, very good vote. And he's the chairman of the Zoning Board of Appeals. And to get to a very heavy topic, I mean, all the relatives of my grandfather and grandmother, both sides, and my grandfather would go back to Hungary and visit his family. 4 sisters he had. Everyone in the family was killed by the Nazis. Every one of my grandmother Stephanie's family, from Hungary, and
Well,
my
me
grandfather just murdered by the Nazis. So
Yeah.
to have this, and then a generation,
Yes.
now where my son could run for judge and be in, to be in this country, it's been on balance, relatively speaking,
And any
very good thing.
offsprings, any grandchildren you have? Any grandchildren?
No grandchildren. No, I wish that could be, but I have two wonderful sons, and I can't say enough about my wonderful wife. Wish to have grandchildren,
Yes.
but never have.
Well, that's great. It's been so wonderful talking to you, another landsman.
You should tell people
Hungarian.
what landsman means, a countryman,
Oh, country.
fellow country person.
Yes, and I'm going to have to teach you some Hungarian, to speak Hungarian. And you said that you know a lot of Hungarians here. I don't know any.
Well, I have to, Maritza Shelley. She's a woman who, like you, she lived through the war in Hungary.
Yeah.
Her daughter is Alexandra Shelley, who used to write for years for the East Hampton Star.
Yeah.
Very Hungarian Jewish person. And there were so many of in fact, a census in 1900 where there was 3,500 people in Sag Harbor, 500 were Jewish, largely because of Fahey's and his watch case factory.
Well, we just finished another wonderful show, and I have to have you back because you have so much more to say.
Well, thank you so much.
We didn't